The takeaway is supported by Progressive. Are you thinking more about how to tighten up your budget these days? Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations.
This is The Takeaway. I'm Melissa, and I am a Trekkie. And not just an OG Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock Trekkie. I also love Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, my fave is Worf, obviously. But I also have a bit of a soft spot for the android Data as well. Do you remember the episode where the issue of Data's rights were on trial?
Webster's 24th Century Dictionary, 5th edition, defines an android as an automaton made to resemble a human being.
An automaton. Made by whom?
Sir?
Who built you, Commander?
Yeah, it's just a little pop culture moment, but it was also a prophetic glimpse into a future we now inhabit. Artificial intelligence is not a distant possibility, it's a lived reality. And Data may not be our pale-faced Starfleet colleague, but artificial intelligence is here. It's living and working among us, making decisions about whether we can rent an apartment, buy a house, get credit, board a flight, or even wash our hands in a public restroom. And just like Data, the android from Star Trek, the artificial intelligence, which uses or misuses our personal data to make critical decisions about our lives, well, it was made by us, by people. And we introduced into this artificial intelligence all of the biases that have long characterized our social and political lives. Artificial intelligence is powerful, but it is not neutral.
My name is Timnit Gebru, and I am the founder and executive director of DARE. DARE is short for the Distributed AI Research Institute, and I also co-founded Black in AI.
Now, you may remember first hearing about Timnit back in late 2020, when she left her job at Google in a high-profile departure. Timnit says she was fired from her job as co-lead of Google's ethical AI team after she expressed concerns about the company's insufficient efforts to create meaningful racial diversity. And she says the company asked her to retract a paper she co-authored about racial bias and artificial intelligence. Google maintains that Timnit resigned. Now, late last year, Timnit made headlines again when she announced the formation of a new research institute, Distributed AI Research, or DARE.
It is basically just supposed to be an AI research institute. So if we were to do research on artificial intelligence, how would we do that research in a way that's not extractive, that is not exploitative, and in a way that hopefully can be more beneficial to people at the margins? That's not what's currently happening. This research is being done in a way that's very extractive and exploitative, and the way in which not just products that are commercialized, but research itself is produced is actually harmful to many people around the world.
She shared some examples about the methodological biases in gathering AI research.
There are many examples of how the way research in AI is done is harmful to marginalized communities. If you think of, for instance, the current paradigm is based on large data sets, large compute power, data sets that are scraped, for instance. And if you look at many parts of that pipeline are harmful. So just start with how the data, the raw material is extracted, right? It's extracted from many people around the world without their consent and without their compensation to them, right? So all of these companies and all of these researchers are dependent on people's data, but the people who are providing that data are many times not aware that their data is being used for many purposes, and they're not, let alone being compensated for it. So when you look at the people annotating this data, they're also being exploited and extracted from. In summary, when you look at how the research is produced and the paradigm that within which both academic institutions and tech companies operate, that is extractive. And then when you look at the way in which these models are deployed and the applications that are used, that is also harmful to people in marginalized communities.
Now, I wanted to know how DARE plans to do things differently.
I've come to realize when many people ask me about DARE that our biggest focus is actually on the way that we work, the way that we produce this research, and that also means culture, the culture that we hope to create in our institute, because we believe that all of the tech artifacts that you see are very much influenced by the culture at the tech company. So, for example, we hear very prominent people boasting about working 90 plus hours, and they talk about how exceptional innovation requires exceptional work ethic. And that's not what I believe. I believe that human beings need to work a certain amount of time and live their lives other amount of time. We're not machines, and you can't do good research working those hours. And there's a reason that the labor movement existed to make sure that we're not exploited in that way. So at DARE, we're not hoping to, have those kind of ridiculous work hours. In addition to that, the types of people we want to have, we want to value their lived experiences. What do I mean by that? Many times, the research process is exploitative because you have people who are subjects that are being researched about, who are usually not the ones who benefit from the output of the work. So, what does it mean to value someone's lived experience? It means to value their that type of knowledge that they bring, appropriately compensate them, and make sure that the work that's being done actually benefits them as well.
We'll be back with more of my conversation with artificial intelligence researcher Timnit Gebru in just a moment.
WNYC Studios is supported by Bard College's #1 ranked MBA in Sustainability program. The Bard MBA educates future business and nonprofit leaders to innovate solutions to critical social, environmental, and economic challenges to create a more just, sustainable future. The Bard MBA is a hybrid program designed to accommodate working professionals. Applications due May 1st for fall enrollment. gps.bard.edu. The takeaway is supported by Audible. Listen to the Book of Baraka, an innovative and groundbreaking new Audible original co-authored by acclaimed writer Jelani Cobb, a staff writer at The New Yorker. Hear how Baraka, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, grew from spoken word artist to school principal to successful politician, mixing prose and poetry, musical interludes, and powerful soliloquies. Ross vividly captures a tumultuous period of political and social struggle and ultimately boundless hope and renewal. Visit audible.com/The Book of Baraka. Listen now.
Here's another podcast you may enjoy: This Day in Esoteric Political History, part of the Radiotopia Network from PRX. Look, we are living in what can feel like unprecedented times, which is why a lot of us are turning to history for clues or just a good story. 3 times a week, the This Day crew, that's me, Jody Avirgan, and historians Kelly Jackson and Nicole Hemmer, pick a moment, famous, forgotten, epic, and weird, and talk about what it all means. It's also short, and it's also fun. Listen to This Day in Esoteric Political History wherever you get your podcasts.
Back with you on The Takeaway. I'm Melissa Harris-Perry. We've been speaking with Timnit Gebru, founder and executive director of Distributed AI Research. We've been talking about racial bias, AI research, and tech. Now, I asked her to tell us about her role at Google in their ethical AI team and the circumstances surrounding her departure.
So at Google, like I said, I was an AI researcher, but I was co-leading a team called the Ethical AI Team that was founded by my co-lead, Margaret Mitchell. As part of that work, there were a lot of people asking us about the ethical implications and considerations of something called large language models. So large language models are a type of language technology. So for instance, if you have, machine translation, you're trying to translate from one language to another automatically, or even they're even used in search. You have a search query and the search query is ranked. And so what you see at the top versus elsewhere. So language technology is literally used everywhere, autocomplete, all sorts of things, chatbots. So partly motivated by these questions that people were asking us internally, myself and my collaborator at University of Washington, Emily Bender, and Meg and many other members of our team wrote this paper called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots, Can Large Language Models Be Too Big? So we were talking about the dangers of this race that we were seeing of building larger and larger language models. All of these companies seems to have this race to have the ever larger models without really thinking about why do you want to build larger and larger models, and what are the costs? We talk about what it means when you depend on this huge data set of the internet. So there's this kind of misconception that because you have such a large data set on the internet, you're representing a diversity of views. And so we talk about how that's not the case. The internet represents the views of really the dominant views that often are sexist, racist, and ableist, etc., and ageist. And so we discussed that.
Timnit says that she and her team did not find a warm reception for their work at Google.
We listed out all of these kind of potential harms and our thoughts on how to mitigate them on a scientific academic paper. And we submitted this paper for peer review at an academic conference, one of the foremost academic conferences in this area. And last minute, people at Google told us to retract this paper, and I wanted to know why and what kind of process they used to arrive at the conclusion that we need to retract this paper, because we followed all the internal processes we knew at Google. And then they said, oh, we accept your resignation. And, they cut me off of the corporate account immediately. And my manager's manager emailed my direct report saying that I had resigned, and my manager didn't even know. And then there was a whole public thing, and they wrote, an email to the entire Google research community saying that my paper was subpar. And then that was a dog whistle to these white supremacists who started attacking me, and it was a whole thing.
In a message shared publicly following Timnit's departure from Google, the head of the company's AI division, Jeff Dean, wrote that her paper, quote, had some important gaps that prevented us from being comfortable putting Google affiliation on it. Timnit says that the problems she encountered are not exclusive to Google.
DARE's director of research, Alex Hanna, who recently announced her resignation from Google to join DARE, wrote a resignation letter, which was basically like an academic work. And a lot of people said they will actually designate it as a reading material in their classes. And Alex mentions the fact that Google is a white organization, and we need to name that whiteness. And she mentions that many of these large tech companies are the same, and so. And once you start analyzing how they're created and how their structure works and what they prioritize, you start understanding why many of us and many of my colleagues, many other people of color, are not, they can't get through the door. And B, once they get through the door, they're completely miserable. At Google, the Black women leave at the highest rates more than anyone. So it's not just Google culture. I mean, Google culture has its specifics, but if I were to look at most large tech companies, they are built in a white supremacist and patriarchal foundation. And if you try to poke at it, you'll be ejected immediately. So it's basically, to me, very indicative of the larger Silicon Valley, and then the U.S. and many other Western countries.
Now, given that so many different aspects of the tech industry reveal these endemic biases, I asked Timnit how DARE can have a sustainable fiscal model without being vulnerable to many of these same problems.
So resources are and funding are something I think very much about, because currently when you look at the AI research, and a lot of times products come from research. Research is turned into products. There are two big motivators, and one is warfare. So you see a lot of money, whether it's academia or not, coming from DARPA or other sorts of institutions, defense institutions like that, or large corporations whose goal is basically to maximize profit, right? So if you look at many historical examples of research, it's kind of like that. So for instance, self-driving cars were there were DARPA RoboCops. If you look at machine translation, automated machine translation has to do with the Cold War. And so it's either warfare or large tech companies, right? And so what we're hoping to achieve here is something different. So if you want to arrive at a different conclusion, that is, if you want to work on AI that is not solely driven by either warfare or maximizing profit for a few corporations, you have to start the entire process from scratch with not that in mind, right? Otherwise, it's retrofitting, kind of like creating a tank and then trying to retrofit it to something that's not warfare. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do in DARE. And so that means that the funding, the source of funding, also has to reflect that goal. So currently, we are funded by these large foundations. So our initial supporters are the MacArthur Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Kapoor Center. The Kapoor Center gave us a gift, and Open Society Foundations, and now Rockefeller Foundation. But I, strongly believe that solely depending on these types of grants is not a sustainable way to run an entire research institution where you have, people's full-time jobs that are dependent on it. So we're also trying to figure out how we can have our own source of revenue and kind of exploring different ways that we can do that ourselves too.
Our thanks to Timnit Gebru, founder and executive director of DARE and founder of Black in AI.
I'm David Remnick, and each week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, my colleagues and I unpack what's happening in a very complicated world. You'll hear from the New Yorker's award-winning reporters and thinkers, Jelani Cobb on race and justice, Jill Lepore on American history, Vincent Cunningham and Gia Tolentino on culture, Bill McKibben on climate change, and many more. So please never miss an episode. Listen to the New Yorker Radio Hour wherever you get your podcasts.